Love Under the Stars opens with Becca, the female lead, scrambling to get ready for school. Hastily, she puts on her clothes and rushes out the door. On the other hand, Emily and her father Nate prepare for their day, clearly used to the routine. As they walk to Emily's school, her relationship with her father, who is recently widowed, is shown to be someone who is loving and strong. They talk about making maps, which is Nate's job, and their bond is ever more visible when he drops her off at school but waits at the entrance, knowing full well she will return to wave goodbye one more time. Becca runs into her school building and into a lecture hall. As she sits and settles into class, she makes a distracting noise when her books fall to the floor. The scene shifts to Emily's lunch with her father. He asks about her day, but her response is a little lukewarm, her eyes bearing just a tint of sadness. Noticing this, Nate attempts to make her happier by playfully using the carrots from her meal to construct a miniature fort on her plate. Emily's face slowly brightens as they build together, and Nate promises to continue after dinner, bringing a smile to her face. Becca goes into Walt's office. Their warm, friendly smiles to each other immediately making it clear that they have managed to establish a friendly bond. As they sit, Walt's encouraging tone and humor puts Becca at ease, and they settle into a friendly conversation. Walt encourages her to reach her true potential, reiterating the importance of finishing her thesis and graduating college to become part of the real world with real responsibilities. Walt gives her advice, encouraging her to select a topic that truly resonates with her, which is child psychology. Noting her interest, he offers to arrange a meeting with his niece Amy, who is a 4th grade teacher. He suggests that Becca observe the class, relate with the students, and explore their world to find inspiration for her thesis. When Becca meets Amy, she is surprised by how welcoming she is. Amy, true to her kind and compassionate nature, agrees to let Becca help with her 4th grade class, trusting in her uncle's judgment. With a kind smile, Amy assures Becca she is glad to have her around, confident that Walt would not recommend someone who wouldn't be a great fit for the class. On a field trip, she finds Emily totally focused on drawing a map of the surrounding area. With remarkable attention to detail, she is drawn to the child's creativity and difference, and they have a brief conversation that hints at a closer relationship in the making. In the next scene, Amber, Becca's friend and neighbor, gets to her house with a large bowl of macaroni and cheese, a recipe which she claims is her mother's. She complains about not seeing Becca around for a while. Becca explains that she'd been caught up with schoolwork. They sit to eat, and Amber hints that she knows Becca has only recently broken up with her boyfriend and might need comforting. Becca, though surprised, does not appear to be upset about the breakup when she speaks about it. Becca returns to the classroom, resuming her role as a teacher's assistant to Amy. During recess, she joins the children on the playground, effortlessly connecting with them as they play and laugh together. As she looks around the lively playground, her attention is drawn to Emily sitting alone on a bench. Curious, she asks discreetly about Emily from some of the other children. They inform her that Emily has not been remotely as chatty as she used to be since her mother's passing 2 years prior. Sympathetic, Becca meets Emily with a compassionate smile on her face. When she asks how she is doing, as if on reflex, Emily states that she is fine. Becca, sensing this, starts a brief but meaningful conversation, and we see that despite their initial reserve, they seem to develop a mutual liking. Later, Becca meets with Walt to discuss the progress of her thesis. As they talk, she mentions Emily's situation, but dismisses the possibility of any inspiration. Walt, after listening thoughtfully, offers a simple but wise suggestion. She should write about something that she understands and relates to. During an active physical education class, Emily approaches Becca, a shy smile on her face. She asks Becca if she would like to join her for a play date. Happy about the invitation, Becca gladly agrees. They agree on a time to meet at a local ice cream shop. As Becca walks to her college, she puts a call across to Walt to share the exciting news. She has been invited on a play date by Emily after school, and she apparently is excited about it. Walt's warm response puts a smile on her face as she continues her stroll to school. The next day, when Becca arrives, Nate is surprised, clearly not expecting a 30-plus woman to be his daughter's new friend. Becca, recognizing the surprise on his face, quickly explains that she is a teacher's assistant. Putting Nate at ease, the three of them bond over a large bowl of ice cream with multiple flavors and discuss Becca's career choices. That night, distressed by a nightmare, Emily tosses and turns. Meanwhile, Becca lies awake with a smile drawn across her face as she stares at her ceiling. She reaches for her diary and begins to write as the scene fades. The next day, Becca, in typical fashion, is late to the elementary school. She finds Nate at the entrance, fully focused on drawing a map of the school for its website. With a smile, she meets him, offering to give him a tour of the school. Nate, noticing her flustered appearance, notes that she must be late, seeing as she is rushing into school. With a smile, she persuades him that her rush is simply an attempt to squeeze in some extra cardio. Nate is amused, but lets her give him the tour. As they walk from area to area, they find themselves in a room filled with art, where they have a conversation about her education and his work. Becca's interest in Nate becomes increasingly obvious as they talk. As she leaves, Nate suggests another play date for Emily, although this time, his tone suggests that he might be looking for an excuse to spend time with her himself. She accepts the plan, the possibility of a flourishing connection between them. Becca and Nate enjoy a fun-filled day of playing miniature golf, with Becca showing off her impressive skills. In between jokes and laughter, they share a heartfelt conversation about Emily's mother's passing and her struggles with the aftermath of the leukemia diagnosis. When Professor Harris asks Becca about her thesis, she explains that she has not made much headway, and he implies that she might just be procrastinating. Later, Nate's work demands intensify, and he finds himself unable to spend the day with Emily. He calls on Becca, who accepts to watch Emily while he works without hesitation. They have a fun outing to the planetarium, but the fun afternoon takes a turn when Emily wanders off. Panic sets in as they search for each other frantically, Becca urging and hurrying a security guard to search with her. Just then, she spots Emily on the other side of a glass door, relief washing over her. Emily is in tears when they are finally reunited. Clinging to Becca tightly, Becca comforts her, calming her down as they make their way back home. When they get to the house, Nate tucks her into bed. After Emily is properly settled in, Becca, apologetic and afraid Nate might be upset, explains the events of the day to him. Fortunately, Nate understands and is not upset in the least. He shares a similar experience from the past with her and encourages her to be kinder to herself. When she leaves, Nate sits by Emily, holding her hand and reassuring her that he will always be a constant presence in her life. Emily, soothed by his words, embraces him. The next day, Becca is worried, afraid that she might have traumatized Emily when she lost her in the planetarium. Walt listens attentively, his expression kind and understanding. Becca talks about abandoning her psychology major, and he immediately shuts down that train of thought. He reminds her of her love for the course and refuses to let her give up on something she is good at. Becca and Emily spend an afternoon at the mall in a shop filled with bright, colorful dresses and accessories. Emily is visibly excited when she requests a makeover, but Becca hesitates, afraid the little girl's desire for a transformation is as a result of insecurity. She tries to reassure her she is perfect just the way she is, but Emily manages to convince her, and soon they are both getting a makeover. As they get dressed, Emily shows Becca her late mother's favorite necklace, which she took from her father's closet without his permission. Becca encourages her to show it to Nate, and though he is initially upset, Becca gets him to see reason and understand why the necklace is so important to Emily, so he lets her keep it. When they return home, Emily excitedly takes Becca on a tour of their house, proudly showing her each room. They pause briefly to look at a framed photo of her mother, and Emily notes that the photograph is her favorite one. Next, they read a children's book on Emily's bed, and Becca is moved to tears. The story brings back memories of her own mother reading the same book to her when she was a child as well. At dinner, Emily invites Becca to come along with them on a trip to her grandparents' cabin outside town. Initially hesitant, she is won over by Emily's enthusiasm and persuasion. She agrees to join them for a weekend getaway. As the evening unwinds, Becca and Nate are in the middle of the conversation, which gets awkward quickly when Nate says it feels like a date. Becca gets vulnerable as she talks about her struggle with commitment in relationships, opening a deeper layer of her person. As the conversation goes on, it is interrupted by Emily's scream from upstairs. Nate hurries up the stairs to comfort his daughter, holding her in tight embrace as she clings to him. Becca follows and finds them in a heartwarming embrace. She watches them for a moment, then bids them goodbye. As she leaves, Becca feels a sense of longing, more invested in this family than she anticipated. In the next scene, Walt launches into a lecture about her thesis, insisting she has to quit being indecisive and make some progress. But Becca interrupts his enthusiastic monologue, stating clearly that she has chosen a topic inspired by the time spent with Emily and Nate. Becca goes on to explain that she intends to focus on children's processing of grief and loss, highlighting the need for adults to help provide children with tools to cope with emotions like grief. Walt listens intently as Becca shares her passion for children like Emily, who has changed a significant amount since they began spending time together. Walt's expression changes as he warns Becca about getting distracted from her thesis, stressing the importance of finally graduating. Becca's face turns stern with offense, her voice louder as she confronts Walt and his implication. She suggests that his concern is filled with gender bias, stating that he would not question her focus if she were a man. With immense clarity and anger in her voice, Becca states that she can form any relationship she wants to without losing sight of her academic goals. She reaffirms her capability to balance her personal and academic life. As she leaves his office, her phone rings, and it is Nate on the other end. She mentions with a hint of awkwardness that she was just discussing him. When she asks about Emily, Nate shares heartwarming information. Emily wore the princess dress from the makeover at the mall as soon as they got home. He expresses their enjoyment of her presence, and she does the same. As they talk, Nate offers to return a jacket she left at his place, and they make plans to meet for dinner. But the second she hangs up and heads home, she panics. Suddenly, she is conscious of the mess that is her apartment, worried that Nate might think she is a messy person. Amber, who is present with her, attempts to calm her down, but she goes from soothing to surprised as she learns that Becca promised Nate a proper home-cooked meal. Knowing she cannot cook, Amber points out that Amber never bothered about the state of her apartment with her previous boyfriends, asking why she now cares. Becca reveals her worry, explaining that she wants to impress Nate, a real man. Unlike her previous boyfriends, she feels the need to show a well-put-together life and needs Amber's help. With urgency, she pleads with Amber to whip up something for them to eat. Nate arrives with a jacket, and they sit to enjoy the meal. As they eat, he asks if she made the meal, but she gives credit where it is due, acknowledging Amber's cooking. She later notes that their time together has revolved around food, prompting Nate to ask if she would like to do something else with him. Becca teases that it is a loaded question, but Nate suggests a simple movie date. As they stand in the kitchen after the meal, they open up about how stuck they both feel in their lives, unsure about how to take the first step. Becca uses a wise but simple analogy about making maps, encouraging Nate to create his own path, to take initiative. He turns the analogy back on her, asking her to do the same. As Nate is about to leave, Becca leans in for a kiss, but Nate embraces her in a hug instead. They do not address the awkwardness in the moment, but Becca asks that he send her regards to Emily, a reminder of the connection they share because of his daughter. Back at school, Becca is back in her element as a teacher's assistant. Among the children playing during recess, she encourages Emily to join in, but she leaves when she struggles with skipping. The scene shifts to Nate's parents' cabin. As they arrive, they are heartily welcomed. Nate carries out introductions, but his parents fondly insist on being called Graham and Pops. When they go in, Graham bombards Becca with questions, showing true interest in getting to know her. Nate tries to stop her, but Becca insists she is comfortable sharing. With an open heart, Becca tells stories about her family and her time as a child. She reveals that she grew up with her grandparents, never actually knowing her father, and losing her mother at the young age of 7. They all listen attentively, sympathy etched in their expressions. Emily runs into the living room, excitedly sharing all the fun activities they can do together. She says a few interesting facts about space, which Becca recognizes from their recent, eventful trip to the planetarium. Nate shows Becca to her room, which used to be his when he was way younger. He shows her a sketchbook filled with drawings of intricate mazes and shapes. Later that evening, Nate and Becca leave for a walk after she assures Emily she will be back in time, and they gaze at the stars together, looking for constellations. As they walk through the trees and up the hill, they chat about a pirate's treasure supposedly hidden somewhere nearby. Nate takes her further up the hill, through the trees, until they reach a breathtaking vantage point. The view is beautiful, and they find a wooden bench to sit on, sitting close together as they watch the sunset. As they sit in silence, leaning on each other, creating a sense of intimacy and connection, they kiss finally. They sit there, blissfully losing track of time as it grows dark. Their serene bubble bursts when they realize how late it is. They both rush back and are met with an upset Emily, her face etched with anger. She accuses her father of trying to take her friend from her, ignoring their attempts at explaining their lateness. The atmosphere goes from romantic to tense, highlighting the complexity of their relationships. Nate, seeing the hurt and anger in his daughter's eyes, decides quickly. He asks that they stop seeing each other after that weekend. He is equally upset because he thought that Emily would have a better understanding of his desire to build a romantic relationship with Becca. Regardless, he prioritizes his daughter's feelings. Becca, sad about the recent turn of events, stays quiet. Nate leaves to go speak to Emily, hoping to comfort and reassure her, leaving Becca alone with her thoughts. Back home in the city, the tension is obvious in Emily's unusual, bothered silence. Despite Becca's efforts at re-establishing a connection her in school, Emily remains uninterested and unwilling to participate in the class playtime. After school, Nate tries to cheer her up with some ice cream, but even that fails. As they walk back home, Emily talks about her late mother, and she asks if Nate misses her too. She adds that she misses Becca as well. In an unexpected turn, she suggests that Becca can be friends with both of them. She encourages Nate to invite her over for dinner the next day. When Becca comes over the next day, she apologizes once again for what happened, and as a peace offering, she shows Becca the new lights they set up in her bedroom that project small star shapes all over the room. Becca tells her to picture her mother in the stars whenever she feels alone, because her mother is always going to be watching over her, even when she does not feel it. Becca sits at a desk working on her thesis when Nate's call interrupts her. Without hesitation, he tells her that with Emily's blessing, he has decided to ask her out on a date. They make plans for that night, and Emily helps Nate pick an outfit, while Amber does the same with Becca in her apartment. When they arrive at the miniature golf spot, Nate announces that Becca will be playing blindfolded to level the playing field and hold her to her previous boasts. Despite the challenge, Becca manages to sink a hole in one. Nate is surprised, impressed by her skill. In a surprising yet welcome deviation from her usual pattern, Becca shows up to school on time, 3 days in a row, catching the attention of Professor Harris. He commends her recent punctuality, acknowledging that when she applies herself, she is indeed one of his brightest students. Although he is cautious to not let the praise get to her head, It brings a smile to her face. Meanwhile, Nate gets Emily to school and, as usual, waits at the entrance for her to return to say goodbye once again. But she does not. He shrugs it off and leaves. Happy about the growth and change, Emily breaks away from her recent behavior in school, joining her classmates for recess and playing in the open with them. Later, back in Nate and Emily's house, Becca has a conversation with him, revisiting an earlier discussion about Becca's relationship deadline, her tendency to bring relationships to an end after a period of 6 months. Nate has reservations, pointing out that if this pattern proves to be true, he is unwilling to take the risk of going further in the relationship. Just as the conversation goes further, Emily comes down the stairs, calling for Becca, interrupting the moment and shifting all the focus to her. When she goes upstairs with Emily, Nate gets up as well to pack up her book bag off the floor, but her books slip out onto the floor. He picks them up, finding her printed out copy of her thesis. The title intrigues him, and he reads through it. Angry and hurt, he confronts her when she comes back downstairs. Nate thinks she has simply been using them as test subjects for her thesis and is hurt by that discovery. Angrily, he asks her to leave, refusing to listen to her explanation. Emily, hearing the commotion, comes out of her bedroom and watches him send Becca out of the house. Nate, realizing she saw everything, goes up to her bedroom to speak to her. With composure unusual for a child her age and tears in her eyes, she asks that her father lets her be alone for a moment. Becca, heartbroken and visibly in a depressive mood, unwilling to do anything, remains in her apartment. Amber tries without success to comfort her, but Walt comes to the apartment unannounced and unexpected, determined to get her back to work on her thesis and out of her gloom as soon as possible. He encourages her to finish the thesis and defend it, refusing to let her give up and not graduate as she should. Walt then visits Nate, persuading him to attend the thesis presentation. As they listen to Becca's presentation, they realize the thesis is actually about her own personal struggles and loss, not about using them as test subjects. She goes on to describe her relationship with Nate and Emily, specifically Emily, pointing out the child's brilliance. As she goes on, she explains why she was drawn to Emily, their shared understanding of the loss of a parent at a young age. Although she highlights a difference between their experiences, Emily has a support system to help her through the hurt and trauma. The emotional discovery surprises Nate, but he admits his mistake in the open and apologizes for his actions, pulling her in for a kiss. As the presentation concludes, they leave the building hand in hand, marking a new beginning in their relationship. The movie comes to an end on a hopeful, pleasing note.